This morning, I wanted to talk about a few things. Of course, about Planet Centric Design, but I also wanted to highlight the way in which a tech company like Vincit is approaching the broad topic of sustainability, and how are we utilizing this big concept and applying it to our everyday work. So a couple of words about why we are doing, why we see that there is a need for taking sustainability into account in our work. Well, we recognize the world is changing really fast. Actually, something we realize in our business is that 15 years ago, when working with customers that needed some sort of digital solutions, they really they didn't need much. They needed usually a website, or they needed some sort of automated technology that would make their business profitable. However, nowadays we're looking at a much more complicated picture. We are looking at users that or people that already expect a much higher level of experience. We see, of course, competitors not only from the same country, but competitors from all around the world. So we are seeing that the level of service needed for our customers is a lot more complex. And in order to stay relevant, one of the very important factors that we have started seeing in our business is sustainability, and how different businesses approach sustainability. So what we have started doing already since 2019 is that we have started working on helping our customers to be better businesses, to operate in a more sustainable way. Very often, what we find is that our customers don't really know what sustainability means for their business, in particular when we are talking about digital solutions. So this is an area where we've been trying to contribute to. So there is here a couple of words about Vincit. I think for many of you, Vincit is probably already a known Finnish company. It has existed for about 17 years, and it has gotten a few awards for its employee centricity. So right now, our current strategy is really focused around creating better Mondays for everyone, for our people, for our customers, and for our planet. Sustainability has become a core part of our future operations, and everyone within the company is really glad about it. There has been a lot of internal movements towards helping Vincit to take taking a more active role into the sustainability conversation in Finland and around the world. And not only in the conversation, we're trying to walk the talk as well. So, so for us, one of the first things in terms of sustainability has been to actually define what sustainability means for our business. So these are 4 areas that we have chosen as areas where we can have the most impact. So where we can actually contribute the most. And one of those areas is that we can, for instance, contribute to create digital solutions for diverse users. So we have trained our workforce and continue to train everyone on accessibility guidelines, designers, developers, team leads, so that all the tools that we build are tools that are accessible for everybody, people with different abilities. Then another area of work of ours is that we are trying to build more sustainable and climate-friendly solutions. So we are not only assessing our own carbon footprint, but we are actually actively assessing the one of our own applications. We started with a few case studies, and nowadays this is something that we're trying to scale up for everything we build. And we are working on a few, we call them DevOps dashboards, in which when, for instance, we create a service for somebody, and we maintain that service, these customers can monitor this service through certain dashboards. And we're working on having energy consumption, and there is a few other metrics related to sustainability in there as a part of the metrics by which their services are measured. Then we're working quite heavily also on fostering a welcoming culture. So we of course want to already increase the diversity at Vincit. We have been working quite actively on this, and this means, of course, not only diverse backgrounds, but also like diverse ways of thinking, like different like types of individuals with different abilities again. And then, of course, we're trying to like be a company that promotes well-being of work-life balance, and that is quite at the core of our operations. But yeah, so this is broadly speaking about like where the company is at right now in terms of its larger vision. But going a little bit more in the topic of planet centricity. So Planet Centric Design Toolkit was a toolkit that we launched in 2019. We created a toolkit that was focused on like, once again, like helping to create better services and better products for the planet, where the planet is not anymore like a context where you just launch your products, but it becomes an active stakeholder that you take into account while you are designing something. So what is Planet Centric all about? Well, first of all, as I was saying earlier, we live in a complex world. It's really moving really fast, and also like we have a lot of complex systems. Everything seems to be a weak problem nowadays, and lots of factors are intervened, and there is nowadays this sort of domino effects in many sectors, because there are many dependencies between not only like different people, but different organizations and different rules and different realities. So within this world, we actually recognize that we need a design process, and we also need tools that can help us navigate this complexity. And this is what Planet Centric Design, or the toolkit, aims to help with. So PCD has, there's three core things to understand about this methodology. First, that it's a methodology. It's a methodology that you can use to design products and services. It's not particularly designed for only digital products. It can actually be used for different purposes. Although many of the examples I will use today are from the digital sector, from the tech sector, due to the nature of my work. But yeah, the Planet Centric Design Toolkit was also created to develop sustainable business opportunities. And it has these three core axes that are responsibility, transparency, and systemic thinking. And we're going to talk about them in a minute. But there are like three axes that are like added to like this user experience thinking. So, and the main thing about the toolkit is that it's a toolkit that aims to bring people together. So we recognize that like people are the biggest like agents of change really in society, and change starts with us. So bringing people to the table and having them focus on certain topics through the toolkit is one of our objectives. So the planet-centric approach has the axes that you can see here on the right. So for long we have known that in order to create products that are let's say that they are like star products, that like especially digital products that are liked by the users, that are liked by the customers, that are great for the developers, we need to like hit these three qualities. We need products that are feasible, that are desirable, and that are viable. And this is something that we have been told again and again, like when developing, for instance, software. However, we think that we also need to think, how do we create those products in a responsible, in a systemic, and in a transparent manner? So what do we mean by responsible? So first, by responsible, we mean that you need to be accountable for what you put out there in the world. So we are advocating for responsibility for the creators of any sort of product. We need to be systemic in the sense that we need to embrace the complexity. We don't need to escape it. We don't need to create boundaries for the products we create in terms of like them operating in a siloed way, but we really need to embrace the complexity of, for instance, the value chains and the networks that come along with like most problems nowadays. And we also need to be transparent, meaning that we need to open up like our processes, and we also need to inform, for instance, our users about like what is going on within the system, to, for instance, try to enhance, I hear it's a behavior change, but I would say like sustainable habits, for instance, or critical ways of thinking. So the PCD approach, like in a higher level, has these principles as like guiding principles of its existence. And in a way, when we are nowadays using Planet Centric Design, because Planet Centric Design has evolved, and this was our vision in 2019. Nowadays, the way we use it in, let's say, in everyday life, it's so that like we have these different types of effects that we recognize. We recognize that, for instance, there are people and products and data. They all have like direct, enabling, and systemic effects. There's like 3 levels of effects that they have in society, meaning that there is like effects, for instance, like that are caused immediately by the release of a product, and then there is also like enabling effects that like just happen to take place after that product has been release, and it's kind of like enabling other, for instance, opportunities to appear. And then there is systemic effects that happen after a year or after that product has scaled up to be used by many people. And we use these lenses to create, for instance, innovation pilots, feature practices, and to drive also like revenue for some of our customers. So this is an analysis that is, I think, well known on the field of like green computing. Is actually an approach that we have adapted from there. And the toolkit, sorry, the toolkit has quite a few templates that you can use for different scenarios. So you can use, for instance, like the app disruption like template, or you can use like, you can try to analyze what are like what's the bigger impact of like the solution, or you can, for instance, analyze it. I believe that my favorite template is the North Star, which focuses on like aligning everybody into like looking for a common objective, but also having into account as the planet as one stakeholder. And we have been using the toolkit in a variety of scenarios, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. So, for instance, here there is the Planet Centric ideation. This is one of the templates for let's say a workshop in which we try to like generate Planet Centric ideas. So, for instance, you can ask your participants here to write their idea there, and I don't know if the audience has any idea they would like to suggest, but we try to think like, how might we, for instance, create a world without the fear of tomorrow. Let's take that, and then you try to have everyone discuss like how would you do that responsibly, systemically, and transparently, and then each of those like responsibly, systemic, and transparent features or qualities are described in here, and you have the participants discuss this for a while. So what happens here is that like in a regular scenario, when you were creating a service, you would be discussing how might we create this like super product, and then everyone discusses on like how might they actually do that, but they don't think about like how do we do this responsibly. So this is, I think, a very good exercise that comes like to complement like an idea, and it actually is quite helpful to put the planet centricity at the core of the design process. So the different tools that the toolkit has embed sustainability across like the entire process of like designing a product or a service. So there is different templates that can be used for when you're preparing a project, when you're trying to understand a problem, when you're trying to envision an idea, or when you're trying to create something, or when you're trying to release something. And you can find more about Planet Centric Design at this website, planetcentricdesign.com. And you can, of course, like always message us, and we will try to help with anything that may be related to this toolkit. So I wanted now to shift from like talking a little bit about Planet Centric Design to talking about how do we like actually build more sustainable solutions at Vincit. How do we actually design for an age of transition? And first of all, we do recognize that like industries, actually all individuals, that have a footprint and a handprint. We are all familiar probably with this concept in the sense that like we all are leaving some sort of footprint in this planet, but at the same time we have the opportunity to also do good and to leave a handprint, meaning that we can have the chance to contribute for a better tomorrow. So based on this principle, on this way of thinking, we recognize that like within technology in particular, there is these three big levels of objects that we can affect. So there is interfaces, there is algorithms, and there is data. And what we do is that whenever we are creating solutions, we actually try to think about these particular factors and we try to affect each of them. So we try to, for instance, bring planet centricity to the interfaces, also to the algorithms, and also to the data processing. And this is one of our like, I think more generic presentations, or one more generic like overview of like what types of solutions do we create. And you can see that, for instance, here, Planet Centric Design is actually embedded within the type of solutions we create. So and nowadays, Vincit produces not only software, but we actually help businesses in the entire like business transformation and scaling up. So we have been like, we can help them with like really technological level things and like, you know, building something, but also we can help them with their own strategies on the foundational level. We can help them like look at their future forecasting and like try to make scenarios for like what their future might look like. And then we can actually help them create that future and deploy it. And for instance, we have also been helping quite a bit on like ecosystem catalyzation, but we do this using some of our tools, and one of those tools happens to be Planet Centricity. So when we create a solution, we try to have that already embedded from the core, and a solution that when we work with clients, for instance, you could imagine that there's all these dots in there, and this is kind of like helping them connect the dots, helping them like find where their root issue might be, and try to help them navigate the age of digitalization, trying to digitalize their business. So something that we are trying to do nowadays is we are trying to increase what we call the sustainability maturity of our digital businesses. So we see that there is this different levels of like awareness and action in companies in terms of like how they can approach sustainability, going from passive to transformative levels, meaning that, for instance, we recognize that we have companies that, like, for instance, that they have their shareholders as their priorities, but they are trying to stay active in business, really active into like addressing relevant issues in society or around the world. They want to keep their business running. Then we can see that there is companies that are reactive, that, for instance, they have to start reacting to external pressure. So they start like being more sustainable by, for instance, creating some CSR rules. So because they start like there is either legislation or there is some sort of pressure that comes their way. But then we also find companies that are like already in this proactive stage where they have some values that are sustainable, and then they try to like use those values to guide their work. And then what we see there is that we are starting to see more data. So often that is like emission data. So we start seeing their companies that start calculating their carbon footprint, for instance. Then we have companies that like are in a little bit of a more strategic level in terms of the sustainability maturity. So we can see that those companies are trying to leverage sustainability in their own, like not only in their own like everyday business, but also in their strategy. So they're trying to like integrate sustainability as a competitive advantage. And we can start there seeing, for instance, innovations. We can start seeing camps internally. And actually, I'm going to show you an example in a minute from a proposal in which we were after this type of approach. So you can see that they are training their personnel, they're trying to upskill them on this topic, and they are trying to create more innovation and more products and services that like leverage sustainability. And then you can also see that there is companies that are clearly now more on the transformative end, where they try to have like this circular operations, and they try to like really have sustainability as like a core factor in their operations. So they try to have a participatory company culture, and they try to have like a sustainable company. So they focus a lot on this, for instance, cradle to cradle operations, and to have not only less emissions, but have a culture that goes around sustainability. I'm looking at your questions here. Okay, so there is a question from Yari. I'm going to address it at the end. And in the meantime, well, this is a view that has helped us to navigate, let's say, the advisory that we provide to our clients in terms of sustainability. We can kind of like place them in one of these levels, and then we can know better how we can help them. And we have a very similar figure for instance, e-commerce, when we try to see like what is the level of maturity in terms of their commerce capabilities. And for us, sustainability is a core value for digital strategies. So we see it in a very similar way. So let's look at a couple of examples. So here there is an example of bookings.com, and this was an example of a proposal that we have worked with them. And the idea in here was to do something similar, something transformative. They were looking at training their personnel in Planet Centric Design, and they wanted to create more innovations internally and support their operations. So what we saw there is that bookings had observed mega trends and had observed that there was more planet consciousness among the travelers. So there were like some mega trends that were driving like their needs. They had a few things. They had the general mega trends that are happening around the world. There's like more people that are planet conscious, but there is also like a need for more personalized experiences. And they had a need for like leveraging more like data for their business. So they are part of like a vision of like a travel industry that contributes to positive change. They don't want to be part of the problem, they want to be part of the solution. So there were a few ideas there, like how can they become part of that positive change? And here, for instance, there was an idea about like, how can they operate their business like sustainably? How can they like enable travelers to be more sustainable? And how can they collaborate, decarbonize the industry? So what we did was that we tried to use the Planet Centric Design toolkit to help them to do that. And the idea is that the core idea here is that like bookings continues to be relevant and profitable, but also becomes planet conscious for the future. So here we had an idea here. This is a view of like when we were thinking about, okay, what are the direct, the enabling, the systemic effects of like bookings, for instance, like how they were here. Here you can see a few ideas around that topic for bookings and how it could go from, for instance, going business as usual towards a more planet-centric approach of operating. And what we did here is we had a program with them. So we had a program in which we would train, I think there were about 30 teams around the world. And the idea was that we would try to like first analyze like how they are operating. We would try to create some metrics with them on like what does it mean to be planet-centric for them, define that. And then we would try these like innovation programs where we would like work together with all these teams for a few months, and then would have these camps that start creating like more planet-centric innovations that like would improve their own operations. And then of course we would like try to like implement those internally. So the idea was to have that intervention that would boost their innovation in a planet-centric way. There is another example here from biathlon. This is a different example. This is an example in which planet-centric was used more. Planet centricity was used more like to design a digital solution to analyze the carbon footprint of that experience. So the biathlon needed new mobile app. They wanted to reach more of their fans through better tools, and we help them with that. So we created, like, of course, all the software applications and all, but also like we maintain them up to this day. And one of the core things that we had there was that, like, we for instance created a few features for their service that were new at the time. For instance, that the fact that they were new for biathlon, the fact that they could like follow the sports live, or the fact that they could communicate like actively with one another and with the biathlon, and all of that data was also being used for certain like marketing. So that was kind of like an interesting like leap for biathlon that had a very different tool before, where there was zero communication with their fans. And one of the things we did as well is that like the app has a carbon footprint, so we can like measure the footprint of the website, of the application, and this is something that is visible for them. And one of the interesting findings that we had in there was that, for instance, one of the largest emissions came from like data transfer and the mobile network and powering some of the devices. So here you can see, for instance, what we did after we found that was happening. So we did some optimization in order to like reduce, in this case, their energy consumption. But this is a case that where the customer was actually quite aware of what they needed, and we tried to support them in that. But then having Planet Centricity and having this toolkit was actually core in becoming a partner with IBU to win this case. But yeah, that is all I had to say today about Planet Centric Design, about how the companies are approaching sustainability, particularly Vincit in Finland. And I hope that there were a couple of insightful things in here, and I look forward to hear your questions and any thoughts you might have of the topic. Okay, there is a couple of questions. So first, there is Yari, who asks, in the Planet-Centric Toolkit, where should the companies that now think of their sustainability start? There was so many of those templates. Well, I could imagine that, so the toolkit as such has different levels. So you have templates that are focused, for instance, on the phase of let me go, like for ideation. So if you're like trying, like I would say that you would try to prepare yourself to try to look at like in which of the phases in here for your problem you are, and then you try to see if any of those templates could help you navigate that. So that would be my advice. Then the toolkit is organized in these phases. And then Larry asks, how might we use this planet-centric design to determine the sustainability readiness of an organization? Well, I think the sustainability readiness is something that I'm not completely sure, like, you know, if it's something that can be determined. I think it's something that like we try to identify where companies are by the way they operate. And we use this framework. This is a framework we have recently developed. We probably will publish it in the future in our next version of the Planet Centric Toolkit. But this is what helps us to identify where a company is at. We try to look at like, how do they operate? How do they look at the topic of sustainability in their like strategy level? And with that, we can see like what they might need and how can we better support them. But I would say that like it's not very easy to like determine where a company is or is not at the moment. We don't have tools that can help us to say that like very precisely. And I think that's why the role of experts, like many of the ones who are here, is needed, because I think it's about connecting the dots in terms of like what sustainability might mean for them.